Dear ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this FIIA seminar, to this FIIA Climate Briefing on the geopolitics of the energy transition. I am Marco Siddi, Senior Researcher at FIIA and Montalcini Assistant Professor at the University of Cagliari in Italy. While we see a major war unfolding in Europe and our thoughts are on the human suffering that this is causing, we struggle to focus on other topics. However, even while we witness all of this, other existential challenges for the planet do not stop. The climate crisis is the clearest example. While the apparently relatively slow progress of climate change in past decades meant that it hardly ever makes it to the front pages of newspapers, we are now witnessing a strong acceleration that will soon have cataclysmic consequences, and no ceasefire, no regime change or military victory will change this overnight. So a long-term, sustained effort of the whole international community, starting from the global north and other major polluters, is required. Yesterday, you may have seen a major report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change stated that climate breakdown is accelerating rapidly, and that many of the impacts will be more severe than predicted. And there is only a narrow chance left of avoiding its worst ravages. So among other things, the report, which I'm just mentioning because it came out yesterday, and of course, a lot more will need to be said on this. But among other things, the report stated that all parts of the globe are affected, with no inhabited regions escaping the dire impact from temperatures rising and increasingly extreme weather. It also stated that about half of the global population lives in areas that are highly vulnerable to climate change, and that millions of people face food and water shortages due to climate change, even at the current levels of heating. So this is the context in which our discussion takes place today. Today, we also explore some of the main, or we mostly explore some of the main developments that could prevent climate change from becoming catastrophic, the energy transition, implementing the energy transition. We also examine the geopolitical changes that these developments are bringing about and will increasingly produce in the future. I will start by presenting the main points of a study conducted for FIIA in recent months, a briefing paper on the geopolitics of the energy transition, which was available in the invitation email and that you can also download from our website. And we will then hear the contribution and comments of our excellent guest speaker today, Dr. Maria Pastoukova. Maria is a senior policy advisor in E3G's Berlin office. She leads the Institute's work on energy diplomacy, international financial institutions, and geopolitics to drive the sustainable and just transformation of energy systems. Maria has experience working with policymakers, academia, civil society, organizations, and businesses. Her specific focus is the energy dimension of the European Green Deal and its geopolitical and economic implications. So within her work on public finance institutions, she designs and develops advocacy strategies towards international banks for their shift away from fossil fuels. Thank you for being with us, Maria, and I will give you the floor right after my introduction, my presentation. I have some slides to share with you, given the topic, so I will now share the screen, and I hope you can see it full screen now. If not, please do interrupt me, because when I'm in full screen mode, I cannot see the chat. Okay, so first of all, let's try to make some clarity about the terms that we are using today. What is the energy transition? By energy transition, I mean the shift in the global energy sector from fossil-based systems of energy production and consumption to renewable energy sources like wind and solar, and also very important to different storage methods, in particular now lithium-ion batteries. A key feature of the energy transition is the increasing penetration of renewable energy into the energy supply mix, electrification, and improvements in energy storage. These changes are driven by the global climate agenda, which we have discussed in other climate briefings recently, focusing, for example, on the COP26 in Glasgow. But very briefly, numerous countries have committed to policies to limit emissions. We are still very far from what's necessary to avoid catastrophic climate change. But you see in this map the different years by which countries have promised to achieve climate neutrality. So, first few points on what the geopolitics of renewable energy involves. It will be different from the geopolitics of fossil fuels in several ways. The factors that will be important concern access to new technologies for renewable energy, the control of power lines, which, if we make a comparison to fossil fuels, could in a way be compared to pipelines. The control of supply chains or access to supply chains of rare earth materials, which are very important, and I will come to this in a moment. In general, we will see energy production become more decentralized compared to fossil fuels, which are, of course, bound to geology. So this will increase self-sufficiency of many areas of the globe, but it will not altogether obliterate dependence issues. They will remain relevant, for example, for continents such as Europe. It will be very important in this context, in this new framework of the energy transition, to make sure that energy is stored and distributed in a smart way, not least because, as you know, renewable energy production is intermittent. So we will see the implementation of smart grids that use digital technology to react to changes in production and to distribute energy when and where it is needed. This is a map from the briefing paper, so you can find it there, and it just shows where we are now in terms of renewable electricity generation. So you see with China leading at the moment, and the US coming second, top 10 producers in 2019. So what are some of the key issues in the geopolitics of renewables? Well, as I was saying before, controlling major power lines will become also geopolitically important. And we could see, actually, we have already seen some instances of electricity geopolitics at work, where power lines are interrupted due to conflict. Another issue will stem from possible cybersecurity risks for smart grids. So this new infrastructure will be vulnerable to new technological challenges and disruptions. Something that has been very present in the media is competition for access to rare earths that I will now come to. They are essential for the production of renewable energy applications. But there are also some other topics that are less discussed. For example, bioenergy is often lauded as part of the energy transition, but it has important downsides. For example, it will compete for land with food production and might make some issues more acute, such as malnutrition as a result of competition with food production and deforestation. Within this context, the countries that will develop the best technologies and implement them faster will be among the political and economic winners. And a key question, of course, is what about the others? As we are talking about a global effort to prevent catastrophic climate change, it is important that everyone is involved. So the question is also, how will the poor countries gain access to technologies? Will the global north do enough to make sure that everyone is on board? This is another graph from the briefing paper, just showing, based on data of the International Renewable Energy Agency, showing patents filed in the field of renewable energy technologies. And you see that also here, China plays an important role. More on China soon. But let me return briefly to the issue of rare earth elements. So as I said, these are minerals that are critical for the production of renewable energy installations, but also for digital technology. So we are talking about 17 elements of the periodic table that are found, some of them especially in high geographic concentration. China is one of the main holders of rare earths, and it is also especially in a prominent position in the supply chain, in the processing of rare earths. It has acquired this position over the last 10-15 years, and it's a position that is difficult in a way for the West to change, because extracting and processing rare earths requires large initial investments, and it's also a toxic process. So it leads to clashes with local communities, and in general, it leads to pollution on your own territory. For several years, the supply chains of rare earths has continued uninterrupted. We have seen some disruptions in recent years, partly, of course, related to the COVID-19 pandemic, but partly, in some cases, also linked to geopolitical competition. For example, in 2010, China imposed an embargo on Japan concerning territorial claims over the Senkaku and Diaoyu islands. So we see that even in this field, while geopolitics is different from fossil fuels, there is room, there is scope for geopolitical clashes and also political use of energy-related minerals. Let me also stress that the energy transition will take place faster and in a way better, so more comprehensively, if the global community cooperates. So this clashes, this geopolitical competition acts as a brake on the energy transition. This is a graph showing the, well, very graphically, the share of rare earth production. And you see that the time when China acquired a leading position. And recently, we have seen some partial comeback of other countries in the field. And again, another graph that actually names rare earth elements and also shows the role of China in both production and consumption of rare earths. So I continue by focusing very briefly on two minerals that are particularly important for storage and digital technologies. The first one is lithium, which is used in lithium-ion batteries. So it's fundamental for electric cars, which, well, as you know, transport plays a major role in greenhouse gas emissions. So lithium is found especially, well, let's say it's not as rare and concentrated as cobalt, which I will discuss in a moment, but it is also found in high concentration in Latin America, in the so-called lithium triangle in Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. And as I said, for rare earths, it is problematic. Its extraction is problematic in the sense that it causes environmental issues, water stress, and we have seen protests of local communities in one of the main production sites in Chile in 2019. Even more concentrated, or much more concentrated, is another critical mineral, cobalt, 60% of which is produced in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is also essential for digital technologies and in batteries, so storage applications for renewable energy. And again, Chinese companies play a very important role in the supply chain. And also here, I think I have to stress that so one of the key issues in the supply chain that is linked, closely linked to renewable energy production is that the production of cobalt has led to widespread human rights issues in the DRC. And here I refer specifically to a report of Amnesty International that denounces how children and thousands of artisanal miners are involved in extracting cobalt. And this is how cobalt enters global supply chains. So I just wanted to open here a small window on China's Belt and Road Initiative because of the impact this will have. It is having already and will have on the topics we are talking about. So Chinese leaders have been talking about an ecological civilization and creating a Chinese digital umbrella for several years now. This relates to the plan, to the roadmap of the Belt and Road Initiative, which aims at bringing connectivity in various forms to the Eurasian continent and also to the developing, well, to the global south. And on this, by the way, there is another project taking place at FIIA, which explores exactly connectivity, if you want to learn more. So there is a debate about the Belt and Road Initiative. China presents it as a win-win narrative. Detractors argue that it actually leads to debt in partner countries and growing dependency on Beijing. I won't go into that here, but I'm mentioning this because Chinese plans lead to a much faster increase in the demand of critical minerals and rare earths, which I talked about before. Okay, very briefly, as you will have understood, the paper covers several key issues concerning the energy transition. So I also felt that I had to mention hydrogen, so a topic which is very popular today for people who follow the energy transition. Hydrogen is often described as almost a new oil, so a new driver, energy driver, and especially a driver of the energy transition. First of all, what is hydrogen? Hydrogen is an energy carrier, so it's not an energy source in itself, which addresses some of the issues relating to storage and long-distance transportation options, especially. So it is relevant, especially for some sectors of our economy, and it can help decarbonize heavy industry. We often hear hydrogen associated with different colors, and this refers to the way hydrogen is produced. So today, most of produced hydrogen is from fossil fuels, from gas, and only little is produced from renewables, so-called green hydrogen, on which, for example, the European Union is betting. And little is also produced using carbon capture and storage. Here I refer to blue hydrogen, so hydrogen that is produced from fossil sources, but the CO2 produced in the process is captured and stored. So these are the two ways in which, especially green hydrogen, but also blue hydrogen, according to some at least, these are the two ways that are seen as the best options for the future. We see that in recent years, countries have begun to develop national hydrogen strategies. And there are plans to develop hydrogen and to implement hydrogen technology on a large scale. At the same time, the process or the plan still needs a lot of work, not least because electrolyzers, which are essential for the production of green hydrogen, have to become cheaper for hydrogen to be deployed on a large scale. And we also see, in a way, the risk of new dependencies, because the hydrogen market, if we want to make a comparison, will somewhat resemble gas trade. So some countries will be mostly producing, and while some others, such as Europe, will be expected to become importers. They won't be able to satisfy their demand through domestic production. Okay, very briefly, I want to say something about what the European Union is doing about the energy transition. Of course, a lot has been going on. I won't go back to the presentation of EU climate goals, EU headline targets, which we discussed in previous climate briefings. But on the specific issues that we are discussing today, here I listed some of the main developments, at least in terms of documents, action plans. In 2017, a European Battery Alliance was created, which aims to secure access to raw materials for the production of batteries. So it brings together member states and industry and EU financial institutions to make sure that the EU has access to has reliable access to supply chains. The EU has also produced a critical raw materials action plan, and also in 2020 a hydrogen strategy, which foresees a phased increase in hydrogen production, so that it is deployed, especially in sectors such as long-haul transport and industry, so sectors that are more difficult to decarbonize. So while we see this progress, of course, we have seen the major challenge posed by COVID-19. But if we look at recovery plans in Europe, for instance, the public funding that was allocated for economic recovery after COVID-19 has also provided an opportunity to accelerate investments in, for example, in the deployment of hydrogen. And we have also seen some partnerships in the global north between the European Union, the United States, for example. Okay, I will conclude, this is my last slide, by drawing a preliminary assessment of winners and losers of the energy transition. Well, regarding the winners, as I said before, control of technology, technological development will be an essential factor. So we expect, especially countries of the global north that are investing in this, and especially those that at the moment are dependent on imports of fossil fuels, such as the EU or Japan or China, to actually improve their position, both in economic terms and also in geopolitical terms, because they will become less dependent on exporters. At the same time, the countries that have focused so far on fossil fuels will progressively lose importance. As I'm sure you will have read in newspapers and in analysis, this includes oil producers such as Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Russia. We can perhaps differentiate a little bit. Some oil producers that produce at a higher cost will be squeezed out of the market earlier, whereas those that produce at a lower cost are likely to remain competitive even while demand decreases. Overall, the diminishing role of oil will also lead to a loss of geopolitical influence by the countries that are currently the main producers. So, for example, again, Saudi Arabia and Russia. And both in these countries and in importing countries, the infrastructure that currently allows oil and fossil fuel trade will progressively become less relevant and eventually irrelevant. And so we will have more and more so-called stranded assets. And this is very important when we're making investment decisions in fossil fuel industry now. Maybe another point that I should mention, here on the right you see a list of countries, losers. It's based on several studies that are listed at the top of the graph. We shouldn't forget that, for example, some countries could be, or within some countries, we could have both, we will have both winners and losers on a large scale. For example, the United States is one of the leading countries in the energy transition, in technologies for the energy transition, but at the same time, it also hosts a large fossil fuel sector, which has become even bigger following the shale revolution from the late 2000s. So the energy transition will also have a big impact in distributive terms. Overall, and I think this should be stressed, geopolitical power related to energy will be more evenly distributed. And while clashes and energy related conflict will not disappear, we can expect global systems characterized or dominated by renewable energy to be less conflictual than those of fossil fuels. Very important, the energy transition will not occur overnight. It requires sustained effort and investments in the long term. Also some of the preliminary conclusions I presented today can involve countries, including fossil fuel producers, especially those that have put aside large sums of money, can adapt better than others and also become drivers of the energy transition if they so wish, if there is political will to do this. Okay, I will stop my presentation here. And I now give the floor to Maria for comments and your contribution. So please, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Marco, for the excellent presentation. And I maybe have only a couple of comments on the slides that you presented that very accurately outline the landscape that we see emerging now. And those are very general, maybe relating to what energy transition or transformation of energy systems is. And I think it's, first of all, really important to underline that this is a really systemic transition. And here we're not just talking about a shift of 1 watt of electricity or 1 thermal unit of energy produced by fossil fuels to exactly this 1 watt of electricity or a thermal unit of energy produced by renewables. We're not just talking about shifting the supply, the energy supply from fossil fuels to decarbonized sources, be it renewables or hydrogen. We are talking about the different ways how we consume energy. We're talking about the need to really shift the way we're talking about demand to really think through how energy efficiency measures, for example, can be better used to enable the maximum use of renewable sources we're talking about. We are now thinking about how the flexibility of the overall energy system needs to change in order to enable for such a high share of renewables in our power systems, for example. So it is a truly systemic shift, and it doesn't just concern power sector, it doesn't just concern heat, for example. It really concerns all of the key economy sectors. And that is why, exactly that is why this is such a structural change we're talking about that brings, of course, a lot of geopolitical implications with it. It will definitely create enormous geopolitical and geoeconomic effects as it completely flips the energy sector, where the value is no longer created by the resource, as in coal, oil, and gas. It is created by the use of technology. We see it now even in the most resource-based parts of the energy sector. For example, the emerging resource base of the decarbonizing global economy, the critical raw materials about which Marco told you so much about now. We now see that it is so much more important who holds actual controls over the production, over the processing and refining of the resources and the manufacturing of the equipment based on these resources than who actually holds geographically these resources in their countries. As you have seen on the graphs, lithium, for example, can be found all over the world, but it is actually China that controls most of the processing facilities, and that's what it actually means in terms of emergent geopolitical influences and shifts we're seeing. Another very important thing, I think, is to really underline that energy systems transformation won't go at the same speed for all countries, not just because countries are starting from a different base, but also because we now see a very, very uneven distribution of finance to enable this transformation, and that is actually why the shift of global finance flows from the global north and from mature markets such as China towards emerging markets and developing economies is such a crucial part of energy transformation we're talking about. Final, very general comment on the energy transformation. I think Marco highlighted it on several in the several slides. Is that political cooperation will really be key. The International Energy Agency, in fact, last year released its net zero roadmap, where it outlined the scenario how the world can achieve the net zero economy. And one of the main highlights there was that net zero economy can be achieved by 2050 if the world actually cooperates, if all countries decide from now on to cooperate on enabling this transition, if the cooperation continues in a business as usual mode as we have it today, then the net zero economy cannot be reached until 2090, which is, of course, way too late for us, and shoots wide over the carbon budget we now have to hold the impacts of climate change. So political cooperation is, in fact, absolutely necessary for energy systems transformation to be instrumental for combating the climate change. Now, maybe a couple very quick thoughts on what the actual events or the war in Ukraine, the tragedy we have been reliving since last week, means for the emerging new energy landscape Marco just outlined. We now have, I think it is not an exaggeration to say we're now at a turning point on many things that are key for the energy transformation, and one of them is the perception of our country's dependence on fossil fuel imports and fossil fuel consumption. Now we see a major push across Europe, of course, to get out of dependency on Russian gas imports, but also Russian coal and oil imports. And this is not just a turning point for the energy systems, but it is also a turning point for the geopolitics and the cooperation between the countries, as it really signifies the end of Germany's decades-long Wandel durch Handel, or change through trade politics and the politics of detente. This instrument has been used by Germany and other European countries during the Cold War and throughout all the foreign crises involving Russia, where the basic assumption has been you don't do war with those who are your trade partners. And the basic assumption has been that through the economic openness, Soviet Union by that time and then Russia can come closer to Europe, and economic relations can be a bridge towards social-political alignment. The events of the last week more or less brought an end of this approach, at least in the eyes of the European partners, where now even the German Social Democrats, who have been the most passionate adepts of this policy, admit that it doesn't work anymore. And this leads not just to this general aversion towards Russian gas and oil imports, but towards rethinking of what the dependence on fossil fuels actually is. And we really see this emerging acknowledgement that this is that oil and gas per se are not just a source of power; they are a major liability. It depends on what side of the production chain you are. So to address this, we see really two parallel trends emerging, which run counter each other almost. On the one side, we see this short-term push for more of oil and gas and coal from alternative sources, as European countries are trying to come away from dependence on Russian exports. We see now the discussions emerging on the more liquid natural gas infrastructure being needed in Europe, for example, on ensuring liquidity of the gas markets, on pushing for more gas storage, and this is now really perceived as a security measure, as an emergency measure. Of course, not many questions are right now raised how aligned this is with Europe's climate goals, which has pledged to achieve 55% emissions reduction by 2030. And this is of course understandable, because now it is a very emotional time, and the first signal that the Europe needs to send is that it can do well without Russia. The sad reality is the dependence on Russian fossil fuels is one that has a decade-long history and unfortunately cannot be ended overnight without seriously damaging the resilience of the European economy. That is why the second trend is really picking up speed right now. Is the this perception of renewable energy, of transition to renewables-based energy systems, of boosting efficiency as the actual way for ensuring resilience of economies in the future, not just against the aggressors such as Russia is now, but just against external shocks that the transition can bring. And this is, of course, an understanding that should have been there 10 years ago or 20 years ago within the European Union. But it is definitely the understanding that it's not just the climate change that drives the energy transition, but also the overall resilience of the economies is now there. And we really see this too happening in parallel. One going for more oil and gas from other sources, the other pushing for more and quicker transition. This also has international repercussions and goes way beyond what is happening in the EU. We now see, for example, emerging aspirations for vulnerable fossil fuel producers in Africa, for example, such as Tanzania or Nigeria or Algeria, who are now ready to act as alternative suppliers of gas to the EU, which is by no means a very simple trend. On one side, this opportunism is understandable. On the other side, it is really a big question whether this new investments in oil and gas production in these countries are climate compatible, and whether they will not end them up in heaps of locked-in investments that cannot be paid back in the coming years, as oil and gas demand will inevitably shrink in the European Union. And then maybe the last point with what Mark actually started his presentation is that power grid connectivity is now gaining an absolutely new dimension and absolutely new importance. We now see the discussions over emergency synchronization of Ukraine with the European Union ongoing as we speak, as one of the security measures, of course, for the Ukrainian power grid, which is now disconnected from the Russian grid and is vulnerable to blackouts, but also as a political sign of solidarity of the European Union, which, if it synchronizes its network with the Ukrainian network, will also partly be vulnerable to the attacks on the Ukrainian ground. So this is with the synchronization of power grids, we're not just talking about some technical linkages. We're talking about political alliance, and we are talking about this kind of a community of shared values, if you want, that is emerging. This is just one example, and this is one extreme example that is happening in a war in the environment of war. But we see the same or similar dynamics happening all over the world, as we see not just connectivity initiatives picking up in Europe, but we see the same happening in Southeast Asia with Asian power grid. We see China projecting its own geopolitical aspirations toward the rest of the world with the global energy interconnection. We see now India coming forward with its own connectivity initiative, One World, One Sun, One Grid, which has been launched during COP26 as Green Grids Initiative, and now has support of several European countries and the World Bank. So we see really this overlap of different connectivity initiatives that are all striving for two things: geopolitical influence, but also enabling the energy transition pick up on speed. These developments are very, very complex. We really don't know where it leads in the end. But as I said, the international cooperation also to coordinate these initiatives and many others will be key to make an energy transition really happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for this very to the point comments, and also for mentioning different contexts from the one I mentioned in my presentation. I want to remind our audience that you can use the chat to ask questions or to make your points. So please do that if you would like to contribute. Let me just maybe continue on what Maria was talking about now. And thanks also for linking the the topic to the current crisis. So with regards to Europe's dependence on Russia, of course, as you said, this is the result of decades, actually, of trade and cooperation. So leaving this dependence will take time. It's not something that cannot be done overnight. And it is something that will have multiple consequences and ramifications. Let me just make an example. Diminishing gas flows from Russia also means that countries that currently benefit from this trade, for example, Ukraine, through transit fees, will lose that source of revenue. So this is just to say that there are many consequences and ramifications that we should keep in mind, and it's not a simple, bilateral issue. Also, one of the other consequences that perhaps we've sometimes seen now in the media is that we will see an acceleration of Russia's pivot to Asia. In the energy sector, this change was already happening to an extent, and it was also driven by the realities of energy markets with Asian fossil fuel demand still increasing in the 2020s, whereas we see a decrease in fossil fuel demand in Europe. Even though at the same time, in recent years, we also saw, or actually in the last 2 years, we saw several countries in Asia committing to climate neutrality. So in the long run, fossil fuel demand will decrease in Asia as well. Also, while we read about plans to import fossil fuels to Europe from other places, we should also keep in mind, as some analysts are pointing out, and as we see actually in the current situation even, that if the EU wants to import, for example, liquefied natural gas to replace Russian pipeline gas, it will have to compete fiercely for this with other importers that have been willing to pay, on average, higher prices in Asia. So my point is that we see a lot of statements in this very tragic situation, but we have to see what happens in the long run. We have to see, for example, for how long European communities are really willing to pay for high prices in the post-COVID context, and how this squares also with democratic elections, with governments' plans to be re-elected. It's, as I said, in general, for fighting climate change, this is a long-term issue. And it will require the sustained effort. So I'm a bit skeptical about some far-reaching statements that we see in these hours, or I'm skeptical about how they will be taken forward in the long run. I don't know if you want to come back on some of this stuff, Maria. Maybe if you do, I can also add a question or a point that you may want to address, which is COVID-19, or better, the consequences of COVID-19 for what we have been talking about. Was it a catalyst in a way? Does it create additional challenges in terms of supply chains, also for the future, not just for current and past disruption? I also see that there is a question now in the chat. Here we have a focus on Africa and Nigeria specifically, and on the fact that Nigeria will go ahead in gas investments, and a very good point, by the way, on energy poverty. So on the priority of lifting people from poverty in the global south, which is justifiably even more important than fighting climate change, depending on where you are.
Yeah, if I may come in on
Yes, please.
the points made, maybe first on yeah, what is said about the compatibility of the current decisions to go for LNG with the climate goals. I think we really need now to we need to acknowledge that we're talking about energy not anymore as a carrier which has just an economic cost. It has at least a geopolitical cost. It has economic cost, but it also has a climate cost. And depending on the circumstances, one of this overweights the others. And in the current situation, we clearly see that geopolitical cost of energy is the priority and is the priority to tackle. And at this time, the European countries are really opting for other energy resources, no matter how costly they are in terms of their climate impact or how costly they are in terms of their overall price. And they are ready to offer support packages for the vulnerable population groups, at least this year, because the geopolitical cost of further dependency on Russia, if the war is ongoing, is perceived as very high. Of course, the big question and the strategic question is how this will shift in the years to come when the conflict hopefully de-escalates, and how this will be tackled. Absolutely agree with you, Marco. Europe will need to continue competing for Asian gas, Asian LNG. The basic problem there is not just that there is not enough LNG, which is true. There's not enough. The production capacities are limited and will be limited in the years to come. So there is a limited, the market is not endless. But the other factor is also that the LNG contracts, LNG supply contracts are usually, most of them are long-term and they are tied to their destinations in Asia. And there is a rather smaller share of the LNG market that can be flipped hence and forth, which is really dependent on who can pay the higher price. And in this case, EU will be permanently competing with China, Japan, and Korea, which are the largest importers of LNG on the Asian market. On the COVID situation, I think there are at least two main takeaways that the decision makers all over the world are now building their strategies on. The first one is COVID was really a showcase of the global population being able to quickly reduce CO2 emissions, and of the global population being able to actually cope without that high use of fossil fuels. And it also showcased how much actually the energy sector contributes to the global CO2 emissions. We've seen the emissions levels drop dramatically after the aviation industry has curbed down its activities, after the transport, which is heavily reliant on oil, of course, has been used much less. But on the other side, COVID has been a major stress test for the current energy systems and showed really several vulnerabilities of this energy system, and hopefully gave some pinpointers to the decision makers on what needs further work. It is, of course, the connectivity issue, not just in terms of the power grids and the access to, for example, internet or electricity, which were crucial or are still crucial during the pandemic. Not just for personal welfare, but also, for example, for such sectors as health, where cooling chains are absolutely essential to keep vaccines coming, for example. It has been a stress test that showed that the connectivity also, when it comes to the supply chains, is not in place. They are or not just the connectivity, but the flexibility of supply chains and their resilience to shocks. We saw even the regional supply chains break up all over the place. That didn't just happen between the EU and China, that happened between India and China, for example, and not even for geopolitical reasons, but because of the quarantine that was in place. And this resilience really needs to be addressed. which is by no means straightforward. So we're not talking about the need to make every country and every nation absolutely independent on other countries and be able to produce everything by itself so that it is not dependent. But we need a much more complex and much more flexible cooperation mechanism, which is global in nature, but also flexible on the regional level that can quickly react to such shocks as COVID has been. Now, on the whole energy poverty and gas question, I absolutely see what you mean, Tony. This is in fact a very difficult issue, particularly for the countries in Africa, and as we're heading towards the African COP, we really need to start tackling the question on how to address or how to link up the development and transition, because we cannot talk to the African and with the African countries about energy transition for the sake of climate or energy transition for the sake of energy transition. The energy transition really needs to develop on clean growth and development in these countries, and otherwise there will be no buy-in from the countries, and otherwise there will be no trust in the ability of decarbonized energy systems to actually deliver. The role of gas is a very difficult one, and of course there are sectors which are still highly dependent on fossil fuels such as gas. We're talking about industry, which depends on high heat generation. We're talking about heavy road transport. When we talk about energy poverty in terms of access to clean cooking and heating, in terms of energy, clean electricity access, or electricity access for that matter, then the picture is a different one. It's for the very simple reason of gas infrastructure. If it's not yet in place or underdeveloped, it takes a lot of time to develop. While there are now, with the rapidly reducing renewables costs, a lot of technologies out there that can be deployed much quicker and can grant a decentralized, admittedly, but clean access to clean electricity and at least some very basic services that are still not in place in many countries in Africa. So when we talk about gas investments for alleviating energy poverty, we really need to think through what actually are we talking about. Are we talking about huge pipelines and production capacities? Because that's not what will help the population to gain quick electricity access. Or are we talking about some speedy rollout of liquid petroleum gas stoves and aligning infrastructure, which is a totally different in scope and also requires different level of investment. But I see there are also some other questions in the chat.
Yes, exactly. So the question also by Tony is about the carbon border adjustment mechanism and its impact. Maybe while I give you a moment to think about the question, Maria, I can start with this, and I'll start by saying that we have a small project with some international partners, the German Development Institutes and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, where we looked exactly at external perceptions of CBAM, of the EU's carbon border tax. And we carried out this project by having people in several countries, partners in China, in India, Indonesia, South Africa, collect information on how they see the tax. And there was nearly unanimous criticism. So this is actually a very important topic for the relationship between the EU and especially the global South and China. I have to say that some perceptions are tied to other ongoing issues. For example, the EU's so far little generosity in terms of COVID-19 vaccines and so on. So this narrative about the EU being a leader and leading by example often does not find evidence or support in partner countries. Having said this, the CBAM, in my understanding, the main impact now is on, of course, on intensity, carbon intensity in production. So it is about energy-intensive products, but it also has an impact in the production of oil and gas. And something that I didn't mention in my presentation is that, yes, some countries have, let's say, a more sustainable or actually less polluting production of oil and gas. And you mentioned some here in the chat, Tony. And this will be another actually factor influencing who is able to stay and compete in the for a shrinking oil and gas market, especially if we see the deployment of more and more carbon border taxes like the one that the EU is now working on. Would you like to come in on this point, Maria?
Yeah, sure. Directly on the question Johnny made in the chat. On the general views on the EU's carbon border tax, carbon border adjustment proposal, this is in fact not by no means a straightforward initiative, and the main problem of the EU in the past month was no doubt communication. It has not reached out to its main trade partners with efficient explanations of what they're actually aiming to do and why this is not going to give absolute advantage to the European industry over the industries of the other countries, and that it is actually meant to target carbon leakage and also prevent the European industries of displacing their own production facilities somewhere outside Europe where they can produce without being subject to the ETS system and with their emissions unchecked. So this basically good intention turned out to be quite contentious politically, and that's a big problem, of course. And Marco, I think, outlined the overall global reaction to CBAM. So if the EU is to proceed with this initiative, a much better cooperation, communication, and much better coordination with the partner countries, what it actually means for that trade, is an absolute prerequisite. Now, on the impact on the EU's impacts of imports of oil and gas, you're right that the Saudi in particular have a slight advantage over other countries in exporting their oil, given that it has a lower carbon intensity, and if burned, it has lower emissions. The big question is, of course, what parts of the overall oil and gas production value chains will be actually subject to carbon border tax adjustment, and we still don't have the final version of this, right? So when we see the full production value chain of oil, for example, then we don't just look at the carbon intensity of the resource itself, but we also look at the carbon intensity of the production process, of the extraction process. We see look at the carbon intensity of the transportation, which are really different country by country. And one of the effects I could see is that the oil and gas producers that really want to remain in the market, which which is shrinking, at least on the European side, the demand is shrinking. Then we most likely will see some competitions over whose oil industry is most efficient, has most efficient production mechanisms, has less emissions intensive extraction processes. So what we hopefully will see is more accountability by the oil industry, as they also need to report on the emissions that they produce when they produce this oil and gas. And we will hopefully also see more of some real reductions in emissions intensity of the fossil fuel industry.
Right, thank you. I see there's another question in the chat for now, and we still have a few minutes for the discussion, if we want to continue, of course. But maybe I would like to come back very briefly to what we were discussing before and bring up the issue of coherence in EU energy and climate policy. Again, we see many statements, not just during the current security crisis, but also before, which maybe suggest some caution in making sweeping assumptions about the energy transition. For example, we have seen a debate on the EU taxonomy and what should be included in it, and especially plans to include gas and nuclear. Which again suggests that there isn't such a consensus on some topics, and also even in the heat of the current crisis. On the one hand, we see commitment at divesting from Russian gas, so from gas, or plans to accelerate the energy transition, but at the same time, we see the German Chancellor announcing investments for new LNG terminals, which in economic sense are quite questionable if the energy transition is to be taken seriously, as there will not be even enough time to repay those investments. So, Maria, what do you make of this? Do you have any views?
You mean on what on the decision to build the LNG terminals?
Yeah, on this double signaling in a way.
Yeah, maybe first on the taxonomy. I think you're right. We see interests of different member states playing out in quite different ways, which for now really ended up damaging nothing but the European standard and norm setting power globally. The taxonomy has never been about allowing or prohibiting any kind of finance. It has been really about setting clear guidelines of what is green finance and what is not. And in this sense, including gas and nuclear in there is absolutely missing the point. So I get the feeling some countries or some interest groups were really pushing for this in hope that it will get gas and nuclear more finance, more private finance, more like, because taxonomy doesn't apply to public finance at this moment, which is not going to happen. It is just as a standard setting piece, basically. It does not directly enable anything. And this is problematic because now we see the taxonomies in other countries looking up to the EU and saying, okay, the EU has done this, then why shouldn't we? Which really kind of scrambles the understanding of what standard setting is all about. On the LNG terminals, I think this is a bit more complex issue, given that what I just said, that we are now really dealing not just with thinking through the economic and climate costs of energy decisions, but also the geopolitical costs. And what is happening now is really kind of a very, very high level political signal to Russia that is intended for Russian gas industry, for Kremlin to say that the EU can do well without Russian gas. That's what this really is about. And I do really hope that the German government kind of accepts that if they go forward with the LNG terminals, which, as you said, economically make no sense, they are very costly. And from the climate perspective, they won't be able to be used for long. So they are already half-stranded investments. That they acknowledge that this is a political signal and this is a rather costly backup for emergency situations such as Russia cutting off gas supplies altogether. So this is a backup that won't be used to full capacity. This investment will not return 100%, but this is something that is needed just for the security purposes. So that's if that's the position of the German government currently, then that's more or less acceptable given the drastic situation we're in right now. But this really cannot translate into the major shift for more LNG investments within the European Union, for more LNG imports, which are much more costly and will actually land on the pockets of the most vulnerable groups within the European Union, which is not even industry, it's the normal consumers.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe two final issues. One is a question that was just asked in the chat and concerns uranium. The role that it plays, or well, in the current crisis, as Russia is also a key supplier of uranium to the European Union. And the question also came up earlier with Kazakhstan's instability. So this is another very important point. I can say that here in Finland, there was an announcement that the process that should lead to the construction of a new nuclear power plant with Rosatom supplied reactors was suspended. On the other hand, I see that in Hungary, where Rosatom also plays a role as a supplier, for now, things are continuing in the implementation of PAX2 project. We should remember that this is also part of the crisis, and also nuclear is involved. So if you have some comments on this, Maria, but I would also like to ask maybe a final point. A final question. We have been talking a lot about Europe, and it's justifiable in the current context and given where we are sitting. But at the same time, I would also like to open a final, let's say, remark on the global South and the question of access to technology, finance, as I know you have been working on finance as well. So I think this is a critical issue for the energy transition, that everyone is on board. So if you have some brief remarks, and thank you very much, Tony, for asking all these questions and for the very relevant points.
Yes, also from my part, thanks a lot. These are all excellent and very relevant and also very difficult questions, actually. On the role of nuclear and uranium exports, yes, indeed, they're coming in focus more and more, particularly within the current crisis. We also see more or less two parallel developments where countries are increasingly looking into nuclear power as a backup or as a partial replacement for gas, at least in the power sector. There are some very cautious movements, even in Germany, on maybe restarting the nuclear reactors. I don't see this as a politically feasible decision now, but we still see this rethinking of the role of nuclear. On the other side, we also see the imminent danger nuclear power poses, as we see that the nuclear power plants now being threatened by the invasion of Russian troops in Ukraine, and we can't really imagine the catastrophic consequences of any of the disruptions to the functioning of the nuclear plants that will have not just for Ukraine but also for the rest of Europe. You all know what happened with Chernobyl, and the radiation levels there are now rising as the maintenance cannot be doesn't proceed as it should have. So we really have all over again this whole nuclear debate probably coming up in Europe, and this is just another point on the overall vulnerability of the current energy systems in Europe, but also all over the world, and the lack of resilience, which is really not so much about the supply, where you get your energy from, but also about the demand, how you actually use it, and how quickly you get vulnerable to supply disruptions. On the global South and the finance for, I'm very happy that you mentioned technology, because that's obviously one of the top points on every international finance agenda. We need more technology transfers to the global South, but it is really important to understand what we mean when we say technology transfer. We're not just saying we need to pump more of solar panels and more of already ready-made technology in these countries and install there renewable generation capacities, and I don't know what. What is really needed is transfer that allows for building up production value chains in these countries that is actually leading to new job creation, that is creating new industrial clusters in these countries. We are not talking about equipment exports that benefit the producing countries or just benefit producing countries such as the European countries or China. We're really talking about finance that enables industrial growth and development in these countries, and this goes way beyond investment in just technology. It is investment in the capacity building. It is coordination and cooperation on the political level to enable regulatory frameworks on the ground that can actually support this development. So this is a really complex process, but and at the same time the highest priority on the international transition agenda.
All right, thank you very much for these final remarks, Maria. And we have now reached the end of our webinar. So I would like to thank everyone for tuning in and listening. I would also conclude by stressing that this climate briefing series, of which the event today was one of the manifestations, will continue together with other webinars and activities at FIIA. I hope to see you soon again, and I wish you a good day. The seminar is over, have a good day in this not so good situation at the moment in Europe. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks all. Have a great day.